Hi everybody, welcome to season 5 of Educator Yarns. My name is Jess Staines. I'm the director of the Koori curriculum, which is an Aboriginal early childhood consultancy that's based on Dark and Young Country on the New South Wales Central Coast. We offer professional development for early childhood educators through webinars, retreats, events, and in-services. This time round on season 5 of Educator Yarns, I'll be joined by Beck, who's the founder of Bush Kindy Australia, which is a program that supports educators in enriching opportunities for play and learning in nature for children. Beck has an extensive background in early childhood education. She leads Bush Kindy Australia, where they take children into nature spaces in all weather, and it gives them the opportunity to play and learn. Beck has experience that spans over many years regarding training and mentoring in nature play, and she's worked in Nature Play Queensland, TAFE New South Wales, and as well previously Cottonwood Learning. So welcome everyone to season 5 of Educator Yarns, where we'll be mainly focusing on the intersection of nature play and Aboriginal culture and giving advice and hopefully some pearls of wisdom for early childhood educators who are wanting to delve deeper into Aboriginal programs and explore opportunities for rich and meaningful nature play experiences. Before we get into the episode today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered on and pay my respects to elders both past and present, as well as acknowledging any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander educators who are tuning in. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Educator Yarns. I'm Jess Staines from Koori Curriculum, and I am here today with Beck from Bush Kindy Australia. Welcome, Beck.
Hello, good morning.
So today's episode, we are yarning about some of the best examples of environmental advocacy that we have come across. And I think there are lots that we've seen and experienced in our time, both with children that we've worked with in early learning services and our own families. One of the things that I was just chatting about a little bit in our last episode was recently seeing the flying fox colony in Tamworth. And when I shared some pictures of those flying foxes on our social media, a local sort of said, oh yeah, like they're great, aren't they? But there's been a lot of upset in the community lately because they're being blamed for power outages that are happening in town. And I kind of sort of think like, it's interesting that they're being blamed is like my thing, right? Is that I always think, well, who was here first? Because surely the flying foxes were, and that's their colony, that's their habitat, that's their home. So what is the suggestion and what is the solution, and how can we look at why we need the flying fox and what their role is in community to sort of that we appreciate them and we learn to live with and not against, because sometimes wildlife is seen as being a nuisance rather than something to marvel at that's beautiful, because when we saw it we were like, wow, this is amazing and look at them, but then looking at, well, that they are pollinators, that they spread, I don't know if that's the word, but they spread seeds and so forth, and they're a huge part, they play a huge role in our environment and our ecosystem. But I've seen many instances of people finding our wildlife to be inconvenient. So whether that's possums that have been relocated from yards, or bees that have been, in the centre and so forth, that they've not wanted there. So they're spraying to get rid of the bees, or to get rid of the spiders and so forth. And I think that's a huge shame and a massive learning experience that you're limiting children from when you don't learn to embrace and live with. Yeah,
I think that's the essence of thinking about how can we coexist with nature, work with nature. And that's the message we need to be giving children, that it is actually their place. The birds, the bees, the bats, this is their land, their country, and we need to find ways to live harmoniously with them. And there's lots to learn about that and how we can. And I think you tapped on a really good point there about, why are they valuable in this ecosystem? I think the more we start learning about all these creatures in our spaces, and whether it's the bird or the tiny insect or the bat, that they all have a place and they're all connected through all the different life cycles and who eats who. And if we took bats out, it has a huge impact on other parts, again, like the seed sharing. They all do need to live very together and very independently for our communities and our ecosystems to function well and to be at its full potential.
Mm. And so I'm not sure about flying foxes, but I definitely know with possums, it then gives us an opportunity to say, well, they're here. And if we don't want them in the roofs of our homes and centres, then what do we need to provide them with so that they have a home that meets their needs? So whether that's planting seeds for trees for the future to address that, or working with your local men's shed to build possum boxes and bird boxes or whatever it is, or making frog ponds and bug hotels for our bees, thinking about what it is that our animals and insects and bird life need in order to live with us harmoniously, so that we're not in this constant conflict with the environment. I know that you had an experience with birds, or an educator that you work with, Hannah, had a really lovely experience with birds. And it's something that I hear a lot when I say, well, tell me about your place and who you're living with and how you care for country around you. And one of the things that I get told a lot is like, oh, well, we care for country and the children make a lot of bird feeders. And sometimes we do things thinking it's the right thing, but can be misinformed about what the right thing is. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes because we're on lots of different social media platforms, and sometimes we use that to inspire us for play and learning experiences in our programs. And sometimes there's some, catchy or cute little experiences, but they might be crafty, they might support fine motor skills, but they might not be great for the environment. And not sure I'll do Hannah's story justice, but in her early learning program, they were with children and were exploring birds and wanted to make some bird feeders, as I think lots of educators have in the past. And she was at the local vet and chatting about that. And the vet straight away was like, no, like, don't do that, because we're actually not helping the birds. We're not feeding them the right thing. And then they can also become quite dependent. In what we actually need, if you actually want to help and look after the birds, it's not by giving them this temporary little bird feeder this once this month and then not again. It's actually about finding the local native plants that you can plant in your local area that will actually feed the birds. And I could list some of them, but they're going to be different in every area. So she went back to the centre with that information and scrapped the bird feeding kind of seed pods that we often see of, getting the pine cone and dipping it in glue and putting seeds all over it, to actually researching and looking at what are some plants that we could plant in our space that is going to have, beautiful flowers and seed pods and pollens that's going to support our insects and bird life. And I think that's a lot of different learning opportunities there in that whole process with children.
I grew up in the city, and one of the places that I used to go to often with my family is Centennial Parklands. And actually, they have a flying fox colony as well, but we used to go there to feed the ducks. So that was like a thing. We would take our loaf of bread to feed the ducks. And I didn't know then that feeding ducks bread was not a good thing, and I was there, this is like a few years ago now, and we had our loaf of bread and we were feeding the ducks, and this child from the other side of the pond said, "Stop feeding the ducks bread, you're making them sick." And I was like, so we've changed our practice, in what, like, when we still go and feed ducks, but we take them leftover vegetables and fruit and so forth, as opposed to bread. So like repurposing scraps from our afternoon tea, or that would otherwise go in our compost, well, now we just take that to feed the ducks instead. So we change our practices. But now, recently, I've been to Centennial Park, there's actually signs up, that will, from children, that will say, please stop feeding the ducks bread, and here are some alternatives of what you could be giving them instead. And I think children, I've seen that environmental advocacy playing out again and again. So Coffs Harbour is somewhere I've recently been, and there's lots of koalas in Coffs, and there's often like, the yellow signs like watch out for wildlife and so forth. But I feel like when you're driving distances, you always see those. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I used to look out the window, I'd be like, oh, there's going to be koalas coming up next, or kangaroos. I never see anything, nothing. And so you just kind of like ignore it after a while. And I think children have tuned into that because obviously they've seen the impact of like these injured koalas and stuff on the sides of the road. So they've began to make their own signs with pictures of koalas that they've seen in the area and drawings of koalas that they've seen, encouraging people to slow down. And I think that's a great way of environmental advocacy, because when you can connect a practice to a person or an experience or a community, I think it resonates deeper than just these generic signs that you have popping up all over the place. So I quite enjoyed seeing that.
Yeah, I think it makes it really authentic and meaningful. And I've done that a number of times with children, because there's been situations that have happened, and they're like, even recently when there was rubbish in their space, and they're like, we've got to tell them, to stop leaving rubbish. And I was just like, well, how do we do that? And someone came up, was like, well, let's make a sign. And yeah, we got to make some signs and leave them there. And since that day, we actually haven't had any rubbish in that space again. So
Amazing.
it was consistently there for a number of months, and educators every morning were cleaning it up until we actually got the children involved, and they put the signs up, and yeah, it has a real impact because we haven't had to clean up rubbish in that space again. So yeah, they have an impact, they can have value and really contribute to that community.
I've seen Hopscotch in Toongabbie. They wrote a letter to their local MP because the same day were noticing rubbish being left, and they put signs up. But then there was also a lack of a bin, so they wrote to their local member of parliament advocating for a bin to be put in, and that person came and visited the centre. The children wrote the letter themselves, which I thought was great, and a bin was put in. And again, I think that's about identifying, well, what is the cause? And like as we always say, like if you take it in, you can take it out, and that is a real peeve of mine, particularly after music festivals, that we see people like the area is just completely trashed, and they can say, well, there's not enough bins, and it's just like, well, you have hands, don't you? So however you brought it in, that's how you take it out with you. You don't just leave it. But I think council does have a role to play in keeping our communities and our green spaces clean by having enough bins and giving people the resources that they need to be able to keep country clean and maintain that, because I think most people do want to do the right thing. So advocating at that higher level, I think, is in its own way a form of social justice, isn't it? To really say, well, this is what we need to make a change.
Absolutely. And I think you'll find that most councils across our nation have a website or an app that you can actually report rubbish to in particular. So some of them, even there's, often the reporter trolley, but most of the councils have a space on the website where you can even use your map, you can take photos, you can just give the address about what kind of rubbish it is. On one of the parks that we were at, there was some balloons that were obviously helium balloons that were let off, and it was stuck in the trees. And it was helium, so it stayed up for quite some time. But the children were able to notify council by the app, and you can get children involved. It's really simple. The children were actually taking the photos of the tree, the rubbish, where we were, and you can upload it, and then we can track back and give feedback back to the children. We've reported all sorts of things, from trolleys to a motorbike that was dumped in the bush and then in the water. Even if it's just, a local rubbish bin or a water bubble is broken, you can report those things. But you can actually get children involved. And again, they're becoming active citizens in their own community and learning from that young age of 3, 4, and 5 that they can make a positive impact and help look after the wildlife, our local flora and fauna. And yeah, I think that's really great. So yeah, check out your local councils and look at their website. We have a shortcut on our phone, so it's really easy to find that. If at any point we find rubbish, the children can be engaged in that process as well when we are out on country.
I think these are skills as well that they then take back to do with their families. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that you could do that directly online. So that's amazing, and something that I could definitely do with my children when we're out and about as well.
Hi everyone, I'm just jumping in quickly to remind you all that Beck and I have a series of upcoming events and workshops all throughout Queensland, where we'll be yarning about the new ELF principles, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, and sustainability. We'll be in Toowoomba, Cairns, the Gold Coast, Brisbane, Mackay, Townsville, you name it, we'll be there, and we hope to see you all there. All right, take care, everyone. Enjoy the episode.
The other thing that I was thinking about before we were talking about bird feeders is that there have been instances where we have put up feeders, And where we are backing onto the bush, we do get fires. Well, we have had fires that have come through. And there have been instances that after that we have fed the wallabies that are here, and we have put out feed for the birds. But we've also within that time made sure that we're putting down seeds for new grass and planting things that eventually that to help that ecosystem recover. But looking at how we respond to after natural disasters, so whether that is cyclones or floods or fire, and animals that have been displaced, or particularly birds, like after a lot of the heavy rain I know a lot of the East Coast have had recently, a lot of the birds are quite wet and they can become soaked and saturated. And when you see that, what do those birds need in order to recover? So doing some things, I guess, about wildlife care and advocacy, that obviously we do have WIRES groups that you can, call and reach out to. But in the meantime, when we do see wildlife that are in need, what are some things that we can either be proactively putting out, or how can we respond to keep them safe in the interim before a wildlife carer can come and assist? And then also donating to clinics, like up the North Coast, there's the Koala Hospital. In our region, we also have a flying fox. I've been following her on TikTok. She does amazing stuff, to think about who are the carers in the local area that are really investing a lot of time in caring for wildlife and getting involved in that. And I think by partnering with them and visiting them and raising money to support them, you're also learning more about environmental issues that are taking place around you.
Yeah, they're true champions, our wildlife carers in our local communities. And I think for every community, there's going to be particular species that might need extra care or going extinct, or that need that extra kind of group. And there's often like a Save the Koala group or a curler group. And so I, really encourage educators to look in your community, chat with your council, are there particular birds or species of wildlife that are threatened that do need that extra support? And sometimes it can be seasonal. We've heard about recently we had the bats that were dying. That was quite seasonal. Last year we had a whole group of ducks. So sometimes it might be seasonal. So really building up those relationships with those wildlife carers and those council environment groups are really important to be able to understand what's in your local community and how children and you guys can get involved in your programs.
One of the things that I know that you talked about in a previous episode is that it doesn't have to be Clean Up Australia Day to get a Clean Up Australia Day kit. So you can go and register at any time, and you have to register the event, but then they will send you out the resources that you need to go and care for country, and having that every time you go out the gate, so you're prepared to pick up rubbish and give back. And whether that's in an official Take 3 for the Sea program, or it's just embedded into your practice anyway, because it's a good thing to do, I think is important. Like we recently had a retreat up at Newcastle. We went down to Newcastle Beach and we had a welcome to country ceremony, and I said to them, well, you've just been welcomed onto country, but now the practice is, and to show reciprocity, everyone needs to take some time to go and pick up rubbish from the beach, where we are. And that's a way that we're showing reciprocity and we're caring for place. And there's services that we've worked with in the past, again, Explore and Develop Annandale. I talk about them all the time. They've just got good practice. People should follow them on Facebook and Instagram. But they got involved in the Boomerang Bags project, where they got donated materials from reverse garbage down, well, they used to be at Addison Road, now they're in Marrickville, but Tempe, sorry. So big bits of fabric. And because they're on top of a supermarket, it was quite specific, I guess, to where they were. So they had sewing machines in each of the rooms, and educators and families and community members would come in and spend time teaching children how to use the sewing machines and make their own boomerang bags. And then they had a stand. They still have a stand that's downstairs from their service opposite the supermarket, where they put those bags for people who have forgotten their shopping bags to take them as an alternative from buying the plastic bags, because we know inevitably that ends up in our ocean. So how could we give back? And what we have each year in the city is the Vivid Festival, so the Big Lights Festival. And following from that, they looked at ways that they could reuse and repurpose plastic within the service. So obviously they serve milk to the children. That milk comes in a plastic tartan, and they made a big turtle light sculpture as part of the Vivid Festival, using those milk cartons. So I think making sure that those values of recycling, sustainability, and, you know, general environmental awareness and stewardship is reflected into your program and practice, and making it specific to the community in which you are part of.
And I love that point where you said about giving back. And thinking about that concept that when we're just heading out the fence and going into country, that we're not just like taking and trying to learn and trying to get everything from while we're out there. It's like, what are we actually contributing when we go out the fence? And is it that every day we take our rubbish bag and we do collect rubbish? You know, is it that we are advocating and supporting for those koalas and curlews? Like, are we participating in a regeneration program and helping maybe weed a community side or plant some new plants? I think that's a really great point of that advocacy about actually giving back and thinking about that when we are planning our Bush Kindy programs. I think too often we can get a bit complacent and kind of like, we're going out because we're going to do this, we're going to learn this, we're going to get that. But it's like, what are we actually giving back to the community?
Yeah.
What are we doing to look after those things there? And when you have that approach, the children just feed and enrich that further. Like, you know, if we go for a walk without our rubbish bag and the children find rubbish, they get cranky at the educators because they didn't bring it. We've got to pick it up, because then they're like, well, the birds will get sick if we leave it here, you know. And sometimes like, I'll come back afterwards and get it if we've forgotten our bag. And, you know, I've had children that have carried a huge piece of plastic off a motorbike quad kind of thing that they found in the bush, and they're like, and it was so big, and at the same time they also carried this huge like wooden pole, and it took like half a dozen children, and I was like, I will come back at the end of the day to get it, like, this is too big, this is too heavy. And they're like, no, it can't stay here, it doesn't belong in nature, you know, we need to take it back. So yeah, they become the little stewards and the little advocates themselves when we have that approach and start facilitating that as educators.
And I think sometimes it's just awareness of who you are sharing your space with. So on the Central Coast coming up, I think in a couple of weeks, we have the Harvest Festival. And part of the Harvest Festival is Platypus Day. So the platypus is quite prevalent in a lot of our waterways up here on the Central Coast. So it's just down at the Central Coast wetlands at Tuggerah. They're talking about the platypus habitat, its threats, what it needs, and so forth. And you will probably not see a platypus because they are incredibly shy. But it's just that awareness as a community about where we are and who we are with, and things that we can do, whether that's through being mindful of the detergents that we're using to wash our plates with, or the powder that we're putting in the washing machine that goes in the drain that goes into our waterways, what the impact of that is on and what are some changes, some simple changes that we can make and advocate for, and sharing that knowledge with other families that are within your sphere of influence through your social media or a centre newsletter, in that form of advocacy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can really reflect on the sustainability principle in our EYLF when we are kind of approaching these kind of topic, and you know, have a staff meeting and reflect on that and how we're thinking impact, but also the social and economic as well with everything that we're exploring.
There's a girlfriend of mine, she's got some services up here on the Central Coast, Indigo Early Learning, and there's actually one in Queensland where you are as well. And we were talking the other day just about consumerism and materialism, and that when they're looking at procuring resources for these centres, it's not just to flip through the catalogue, it's about going, okay, well, is this environmentally friendly? You know, is it ethical for us to be buying from Kmart? I mean, like, I buy things from Kmart, but it's considered, you know, really. So, you know, is it cost effective? What are the environmental impacts of this? Are there other alternatives? Can we repair what we already have? Is there space for us in our service? And they also have rules like one thing in, one thing out, and that one thing that's out, where does that go? Where does that get rehomed to? Is it an op shop? Is it, you know, gifted to a family? Is it put into a community library of resources? Is it donated to another service on a buy, sell and spot page that we have? So what are some ways that we can share resources? So potentially, we used to have like toy libraries and so forth. Like, do we need to go and buy it, or can we get the book from the library, or go to a community centre, or what are some alternatives? Can we make it ourselves? You know, what are the skills that we could put in place here? So there's a list of things that they consider. So it's really considering, I guess, before we go and buy something and just collect more stuff, what are the other possibilities for this? And sometimes, yes, they do have a list of things and they go shopping with the children as part of their community excursions and they buy the things on that list. And other times it's considered that there are other alternatives that can be found. And I think that's a great way for advocating for environmental sustainable practices. That's not
absolutely.
just, yeah, you know.
Reflecting on our choices that we're making.
Yes.
Giving consideration to all those different components.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you got questions about nature play, sustainability, or how to meaningfully include Aboriginal culture in your early childhood program? Call 0253 000 306 and leave a voice message for the Educator Yarns podcast. Beck from Bush Kindy Australia and Jessica Staines from the Koori curriculum will be answering your questions, offering practical advice, cultural guidance, and inspiring ideas to support your teaching and planning. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your program deeper, your question could shape future episodes and support other educators across the country. Dial in today at 0253 000 306.
So, is there anything else you wanted to share with some examples of environmental advocacy? I feel like we've had a lot of different examples, hey?
Yeah, I think there's, look, and I could rattle them off all day long. I guess my message to educators out there is, you know, just taking the time to learn about who's living in your community, you know, who's living outside the fence, but also within your fence. And it might be at nighttime because it might be the possums there at nighttime. It might be the things that you're not seeing during the day when there's lots of hustle and bustle and noise of children. But taking the time to learn about the local flora and fauna in your spaces inside and beyond your fence, and, you know, and do that as co-learners with children. Like, there is so much to learn about so many creatures. And, you know, I think we started this with talking about the disdain sometimes for certain creatures of becoming an inconvenience, and like the bats, or it might be the, you know, even the ants that people want to tread on because they might bite me, but they have a really valuable place in our ecosystem. And so, you know, I encourage you to go explore with children. I won't tell you all the answers, but, you know, what place do ants play in our environment? How can we coexist with them harmoniously? And, you know, there's quite a number of different wildlife that kind of get looked down upon. And I think, you know, one of them in my space is the bush turkey, also the ibis, but ibis has become a little bit of a celebrity lately as the bin chicken. But, you know, the bush turkey is an incredible creature. Like, if you look at the extent and how long it takes for them to make their nests and how big they are, and how long it takes them and the effort they go into all day, every day for well over a month, how the male turkey manages to monitor the temperature of that giant nest, because it's essentially compost that is, you know, developing warmth to keep those eggs warm, and how he can maintain the perfect temperature by scratching away to make it cooler or building up more leaf litter to make it warmer, and how independent the little babies are. You know, within 3 days, they're away from mum and dad and exploring the world. Like, there's so many exciting features about some of these when we take the time to actually learn with children about them. And then that gives us a new kind of sense of appreciation and understanding about why they might be scratching up our perfect little garden in the childcare centre over in the corner. It's just because they want to keep their babies warm, you know, and they want their eggs to hatch. But without understanding and knowing, it's that knowledge building that's really important, that makes us change our behaviours. So rather than scaring the bush turkey away out of our childcare centre, we might actually go, you know what, here's a whole lot of leaf litter and scraps we're going to put over this way so you can actually build your nest and, you know, nurture your little babies. So I think the more knowledge we have, the more respect and appreciation we're going to have, both as educators and children and families alike. And so where we can find that really beautiful space of being able to coexist with all of our beautiful wildlife and birds.
That's it. When you know better, you can do better. And I sort of feel like this podcast has been our little bit of advocacy. That's how I've been viewing it anyway, to try and advocate for more early childhood educators to get children out of the gate and to connect with country, because when you have a love for country, you innately want to learn to respect it and do what's right by it and to be a custodian to this place that we live. So if you would like to support us in our advocacy, we would love you to share our podcast with your colleagues or to give us a review, because those ratings actually make the podcast more discoverable to early childhood educators. So if you found what we're saying valuable and interesting, we would love for you to take a moment to share and review the podcast. And if you have questions about custodianship or Aboriginal programs and what you could be doing at your place, you can always dial in to our podcast phone number, which is 0253 000 306, and we'll play your message on our podcast and give you some strategies and ideas of what you could do. Or even if you just have a good story of practice, we'd love to share your voice and advocate for what you're doing at your place to inspire other educators, because those stories are so relatable and motivating for others that potentially don't know what you know and aren't where you are yet. So we would love to share your experiences in this space as well. Thanks, Beck, for joining me, and we'll be back again soon. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. To find out more information about the Koori curriculum and how we can best support you in your early learning service, visit www.kooricurriculum.com.